Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video we have the Retribution Paladin PvE DPS guide for patch 11.1, the War Within Season 2. Couple disclaimers off the top that we always go with. First of all, this is just an overall PvE DPS guide. It's going to be a little bit slanted towards raid, but of course we'll mention like Mythic Plus talent builds and stuff like that as well. However, I do a Mythic Plus specific guide. Usually comes out a few days after, maybe a week after, whenever I have time, basically. I'll get out the Mythic Plus guide as soon as I can. This will be specifically about Mythic Plus and specifically everything, it's going to be in that environment, focused on that, and not mentioning anything about raid at all. I'm also planning on doing a delve guide this tier because so many people are doing delves, so I just want to offer help to anybody who kind of wants help. Maybe they struggle in the higher delves. They increase the rewards for delves in this season, so help anybody out who's trying to do those higher level delves, but maybe they're getting destroyed, and especially can help out Ret Paladins doing so. Another disclaimer is I hate saying simulate about everything. Like, just simulate your character, and you'll get that a lot when you ask questions online. That's not what this video is about. I'm going to try to give you straightforward answers. I might mention simulating is better, but I'm going to try to just give you straightforward answers because I think that's the best thing to do and the thing that people actually want the most. Nobody just wants to be told simulate it, simulate it, simulate it, especially if you're kind of new to like trying to play better. Maybe you haven't even simulated your character ever before, so you don't want someone telling you to simulate your character 100 times. I totally get that, so I try not to do it at all. I might do it a couple times, but it will be with a straightforward answer attached to it as well. Also, the last disclaimer is anything that does get changed or there's a bug and I need to make an update, I do update these guides. It'll be like, season 2 guide update or season 2 guide talent change, like the title of it or whatever, right? And I'll kind of amend it as I go if things need to change. Things that most often need to change is maybe something like trinkets, and I'll mention that when we get to the trinket portion of this. Sometimes trinkets get buffed heavily, nerfed heavily. A trinket that was completely underperforming magically just is playing a lot better than it did on the PTR, maybe because it was bugged, maybe because people weren't using it correctly, things like this. And if those need to be changed, like, okay, these are actually the best trinkets, then of course I will update that and amend that. I didn't really have to do any amends in season 1. Everything was pretty straightforward, especially the trinkets, Skarmrak Shard, Mark of Kardros, and then our Kara Sack Brood for straight single target. Those things were kind of just good and always good and didn't need anything. There was a little bit of a lantern thing. It was so close to the end of the season I didn't bother with it, doing an update for it. But that was actually a very good trinket. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started now with all the disclaimers out of the way. First off, we're going to start with stats. This is something people always ask about. It's very wanted to know thing. It's not super pertinent anymore, really, the way the game works, especially if you, of course, simulate your character. However, it's still good to give people answers when they want to know like what stats they should be looking for. So a very generalized rule for this season will be strength as your best stat, of course, main stat. And then you're going to want to go mastery, crit haste meaning crit is about equal to haste. So crit and haste are about good. Maybe have them be close to each other in general. Crit haste, both good. And then versatility being your last option as a stat that you want. So again, let's go through it again. Strength, mastery, crit haste. So maybe favor crit a little bit, but crit haste, and then into versatility as our least important stat. So that's kind of where we are when it comes to stats for Retribution Paladins. Let's go ahead and move into hero talents and talents. So let's open up our talent here. Let's do single target first, and then we will go into a Mythic Plus build. So we are going to go through every talent at least quickly. This is going to take a while, so, skip to a different chapter if you need to here. But we're going to go through everything for people. First of all, let's start with hero talents. So for this season, as of right now, you're going to be playing Templar for all types of content. That's for Raid, that's for Mythic Plus, that's for Delves. They tried to buff Herald of the Sun. I tested the crap out of Herald of the Sun. I'm a Herald of the Sun enjoyer. I tried everything I could on the PTR to make Herald of the Sun work, but it really just doesn't. If you pull really big in Mythic Plus, Herald of the Sun can be equal or even pull ahead if you just do giant pulls in your Mythic Plus groups. However, if you just are doing normal pulls, just hold W pulls, Templar is going to win in Mythic Plus too, and it's much better on bosses, much better in Raid. I prefer more of a single target build in delves, especially when you're doing the higher delves and the stuff just one-shots you with a melee hit. You can't pull too many things. So Templar, pulling one thing at a time or two things at a time, Templar is going to shine there. And so Templar is kind of the thing to go with here. There's 2 throughput talents that you have a choice node on, so we'll go over those. We have Zealous Vindication in the top left, and the bottom left, we have Sanctification. So those are the 2 choice nodes you'll want. Of course, I will link this talent build below and the Mythic Plus build below if you just want to copy the talents. But those are the 2 choice nodes that actually give throughput. Other than that, you just fill everything out. I prefer Unrelenting Charger here. You don't have to do it. That's not a throughput talent, so you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Let's go ahead and go through the Paladin talents. Again, this is a single target, more of a raid-focused build here. You're going to start with, you're going to have Lay on Hands. Of course, you want that for the utility of it. Hammer of Wrath, you start with that. Devotion Aura, start with that, or all your auras. Empyrean Ward, you don't have to have this by any means, but you can take that. I have it in my build. Fist of Justice, again, not really needed in raid. You can kind of move that talent if you like. Healing Hands, this one's actually really good to have. It increases your Word of Glory heal on yourself, and then over here you can play Guided Prayer on the Ret side, and they kind of synergize together really well. Obviously, you want your Divine Steed. You'll have Greater Judgment naturally. Cavalier, Blessing of Freedom. Rebuke, you don't necessarily need that for a lot of raid fights, so that could be a talent you play around with. Obduracy, I like to have this just for damage reduction. Divine Toll, you'll definitely want that. That's a mandatory one. Unbound Freedom, really, really good, again, for raid. Sanctified Plates for all content. Blessing of Sacrifice, just to have it. Even if you're not a huge Blessing of Sacrifice user, which a lot of Rets aren't, it's good to have that. You might need to use it at some point. Auto Sac is definitely an option later on, but I don't recommend using it on Prog. Divine Resonance, mandatory. Bop, going to need that in most raids at some point. I like to play Consecrated Ground this tier because we're going to talk about Divine Hammer later on the Ret side, and Consecrated Ground is just going to make that AoE a little bit bigger. Make sure you're getting hits with your Divine Hammer spinning around you. You're going to want to take Holy Aegis, that's throughput. Divine Purpose, again throughput. Unbreakable Spirit's a very good talent. Lead the Charge, very good one to get down there. Holy Ritual, not that important. Blessed Calling, not that important. Inspire Guard, definitely worth taking. Seal of Might, mandatory. DPS throughput. Vengeful Wrath, again, DPS throughput, mandatory. Of Dusk and Dawn, DPS throughput, mandatory. Lightbearer, not mandatory. And Light Revocation, not mandatory. But just kind of wanted to go through all those talents. Mythic Plus build will be very similar. It'll be a little bit different to this because we are in different type of combat, different type of content. Let's go through the Ret side. This is, again, raid, single target. So it's going to be focused very heavily on single target. At the top, Blade of Justice, of course. Divine Storm, have to take that. On our first choice on the left, we're going to take Swift Justice over Light of Justice. We're going to take X-Purg. This puts the dot on our Blade of Justice. Very important. Improved Blade of Justice. We want our Blade of Justice to have 2 charges. We move over here. We want Final Verdict as our single target Holy Power spender. Guided Prayer. Again, it just works very well with Healing Hands there. It's like a free lay on hands that saves you sometimes. We want to have Art of War selected in this choice node. When we move down to the next row, we're going to take Jurisdiction. We're going to take Crusade over Avenging Wrath. We're going to take Zealot's Fervor. And then we're going to take Rush of Light. If you played Season 1, you might be wondering where Vanguard Momentum went. That's going to be the next row. We just simply move that talent down to Divine Hammer. On this next row, we're going to do Boundless Judgment as our Judgment talent. We're going to take Crusading Strike Auto Attack. Crusading Strikes right here. We skip over Divine Wrath because it does not work with Radiant Glory. We're going to take Divine Hammer. This was reworked. I did a whole video about it. We'll talk about it more. But Divine Hammer basically does, for 3 Holy Power, it spins a hammer around you, does damage, and it's a 1-minute cooldown. And every time you spend Holy Power, so on your Final Verdicts, let's say, it's going to extend it a little bit longer. You don't have to really play around it. You just kind of do the natural ability priority rotation that we're going to go over. And sometimes it'll extend more than others, but it just generally kind of works out. Over here, for single target, we're going to take Holy Flames. We're going to take Empyrean Legacy. We're going to take High Lord's Wrath. We're going to, of course, take Wake of Ashes. We're going to skip down to the next row. We're going to go with Abjuration. We want our Shield of Vengeance. We want our Penitence. And then we're just going to fill out over here on the bottom left, everything. Blades of Light, Execution Sentence, Seething Flames, into Divine Arbiter, Executioner's Will, Radiant Glory, and Burn to Ash. And of course, I will have this linked below. You don't have to go through every talent if you don't want to. I just want this here for anybody who wanted it. We will have it linked below, the single target and the Mythic Plus one. Speaking of the Mythic Plus one, let's go ahead and move to a Mythic Plus talent build. All right, on the Paladin side for Mythic Plus build, you're going to notice it's very similar. We're not going to go through every talent once again, but we're going to take all the ones that I mentioned for throughput. You're going to notice things like Cleanse Toxins taken. You're going to want that to be able to dispel any kind of disease or poison or whatever in a dungeon. Blinding Light as an AoE stop, even though it's not the greatest stop, it is something. And then Light's Countenance to be able to do that more often. These are very important things in Mythic Plus. Lightforged Blessing is helpful in Mythic Plus. And of course, I will link this below, but mostly you just want to make sure you have the same throughput things that we talked about on the single target one as well. Let's go ahead and move over to the Retribution side. Again, if you played Season 1, you're going to say this looks extremely familiar, but something's different. The difference is Divine Hammer over Jurisdiction. Basically, I think this is something that could be played around with on what talent to drop, but you basically just want one of the lowest performing talents and take Divine Hammer, which is a very high performing talent, and Jurisdiction just happened to be one of those. It's hard. Our talents are very hard to come by on our AoE build, and that just happened to be the one that kind of is the least impactful. However, it is something worth playing around with. But as we go through it, it's going to be mostly the same. We're going to have Tempest of the Lightbringer selected here on the 5th row. Still Crusade. Then we do not have Rush of Light. That's the same, that's the same, that's the same. Here, we're going to grab Blade of Vengeance over Holy Flames. Holy Flames is definitely usable, but in Mythic Plus, but it actually works better with Herald of the Sun as opposed to Templar. So Blade of Vengeance, because you just always want to make sure that everything's dotted up, and Blade of Vengeance will accomplish that. High Lord's Wrath, so that's the same. Down here we want Blessed Champion, so our Judgment can cleave. Down here we want Empyrean Power, that's more Divine Storms. It also extends our Divine Hammer as well. And then down here, it's going to be very similar, except for we're not going to have Divine Arbiter. We're not going to have Executioner's Will that extends our execution sentence. And then over here, we are going to have Burning Crusade, and we're going to have Searing Light in the bottom right. And again, I will link this below. I know it's a lot, but just kind of want to go over that for everybody who actually wants to hear me go through the talents. So those are our talents. We'll link them below. And now let's move to ability priority and rotation. So for this, we actually bring up a different source material here, and we'll go over why like I do every single tier. And let's pull this up over here. And so we're going to pull up Wowhead. Now, why am I pulling up Wowhead in my guide? Well, because the guy who does this, the raid bots, also writes the Wowhead guide. So when you simulate your Ret Paladin, if you do, it's going to have this sequence. This is going to be your opener sequence. This is going to be your priority down here afterwards. So it's very pertinent to know this information, because even if you want to test against this, even if you don't trust them, this is what's going to be in the raid bots right now. And so it's very important, I think, for everybody to know this if you know you're trying to play at a high level. So let's go over quick the opener. This is going to be single target, and the only difference between single target and AoE is you plus Final Verdict, single target, and Divine Storm for AoE. So just kind of keep that in mind. If I say Final Verdict, then on your opener with an AoE, you would just press Divine Storm. So you're going to Blade of Justice. That's going to put your dot on it. What we just talked about, Expurgation. That's going to put your dot on it right away. We're then going to Divine Toll. Divine Toll early, because Divine Toll is going to have that Divine Resonance. It's going to feed us some Holy Power. And we want to get that rolling so that Holy Power is coming in when we need it. So Divine Toll is going to put us at 3 Holy Power. We're then going to Divine Hammer, and we'll show you all this on the dummy. That's going to put us back down to 0. We're in a Judgment. That's going to put us at 2. We're in an Execution Sentence. We're going to Wake of Ashes. Then we're going to Hammer of Light for all 5 of those Holy Power. Then we're going to Blade of Justice, and then we're going to Final Verdict. And with our Divine Resonance and with our Crusader Strike's auto attack, that we should be at 3 holy power. If you have to, you could press Blade of Justice twice here. You could throw in a regular Judgment if it was ready. You can press another button to make sure you can Verdict there. That part's not as crucial, and that can change pull to pull based on Crusading Strike auto attack and stuff like that. That can change slightly, but generally speaking, this is what you're going to want to do. So let's go ahead and show you that. We'll just focus on the opener here. So we're going to go ahead and Blade, Divine Toll, Divine Hammer, Judgment, Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes, straight into Divine Hammer. And now we can see our thing's not quite full here. So we're going to just go until we can. And now we're past the opener stage. And now we're just pressing our Blade and our Judgment as much as we can. And then using our Final Verdict every single time that we can. And there, so we had our free Hammer of Light there. So we wanted to make sure that we pressed that, as that was higher in the ability priority. And then when it comes back up to your 30 seconds, you're not going to have your Divine Hammer or your your Divine Toll. So you're just going to do Execution Sentence into your Wake, into your Hammer, and then just do the same things as always. You're pressing Hammer of Wrath only when you need to, essentially, because you have nothing else to press. All right, so that's kind of how that works. It's very simple. I was in the wrong talent spec for single target there. And then for AoE, you just, instead of pressing Final Verdict, you just press your Divine Storm. That's really the only difference. We will look at really quick the priority for people, especially if you're new. Perfect thing here. When do you press your Trinket and Potion? You press it right before your Wake of Ashes. So you get your whole setup going, your Blade, your Toll, your Hammer, your Judgment, Execution Sentence right into your Potion and Trinket if you have an unused Trinket to use. So that's the perfect time to use that there, regardless of whether, even if you were playing Herald, which is a little bit different, it's still kind of when you'd want to use it. You want to make sure your Wake of Ashes is empowered when you use it. So priority for single target, Divine Hammer, make sure you're using it when it's up. Execution Sentence, make sure you're using it when it's up. Hammer of Light, every time you can. It's your biggest, like, most impactful ability, I guess. Final Verdict at 5 holy power. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Blade of Justice, just if your Expurg isn't active, so you want to make this active, of course, your dot. Wake of Ashes, Divine Toll, Final Verdict, Judgment, Blade of Justice, Hammer of Wrath. Hammer of Wrath is your least important thing. We mentioned that already. Again, for AoE, it's the same exact thing, except for it's Divine Storm. And when it says at 5 holy power, that means it's because you're at 5 holy power. You don't want to overcap. You don't want to be at 5 and then use Judgment and get to a theoretical 7 that doesn't exist. Instead, you want to make sure you use your Divine Storm when you're maxed out, or your Final Verdict. That's all that means. Now, with our tier set, which we will be going over the tier set as well, with our tier set, it's going to cause a lot of time for us to, we're going to have a Divine Purpose proc, we're going to have Empyrean Power proc, we're going to have our tier set procs, and those are all going to proc off each other, and we're going to go a lot of time without pressing builders. And because of that, Divine Resonance from our Divine Toll and Crusading Strike auto attack is going to be generating holy power while we're just spamming Final Verdict, let's say, right? And because of that, especially for this tier, even if you're at 3 or 4 holy power, just go ahead and spend. It's much more important because that could proc at any time, and all you're going to be doing is overcapping your holy power by trying to play perfectly before that point. It's basically going to end up messing you up. So even if you're only at 3 holy power, just go ahead and spend. So you're at 3, I'm going to go ahead and spend it because, wow, boom. Let's say my 4 set procs, which we're going to talk about our tier set. Now all of a sudden I have to sit here and press this 4 more times. And during that 4 times, I'm already back up to 2 or 3 holy power, right? And maybe Divine Purpose procs during there as well. And so that's 5 times I have to press Final Verdict. And maybe it procs twice, and that's 6 times. And you can see how this kind of gets out of control to where you're just maxing out your holy power. You're just sitting there at max holy power for a long time. So go ahead and use your spenders as much as you can, basically. If you're at 3 holy power, go ahead and spend. Yes, it is good to press your Judgment. If your Expurg is not on the target, it's good to do that. So go up to 4 holy power. But try not to go up to 5 as much as you can, would be my advice there. Especially for this tier because of the way that our tier sets work. Next, let's go ahead and talk about our tier set. So that's basically how that works. I think that's everything because I mentioned when to use Trinket, when to use Potion. So let's go ahead and talk about the tier set since we were just talking about it anyways. So tier set is basically, it's very simple. It's winning streak. It's like the gambling thing for this RNG tier set. All the tier sets are pretty much RNG. Basically, when you are fighting, your abilities have a chance to make a winning streak, and when you're on a winning, and that winning streak can just keep going up and up and up to where you just have a bunch of damage. Or on your force set, your winning streak can end, and then when your winning streak ends, that's when you get to spam your spender. So for 4 seconds, so let's say I'm at 5 holy power, my winning streak ends. I now am stuck at 5 holy power for 4 seconds or whatever, and I'm just spamming final verdict. So I'm overcapping my holy power, which we just talked about, and I'm just spamming it. And this, of course, will extend our divine hammer. It'll have other interactions as well. It might proc our divine purpose. We might get Empyrean power during all this, right? And so we're just spamming our abilities when our winning streak ends, and we then have our force set activate or whatever. And so basically, this doesn't, now that might sound a little confusing, but it doesn't really change how you play that much, except for the fact, like I said, of maybe not going up to 5 holy power, maybe spending at 3, maybe spending at 4, trying not to build to 5, which has been, you know, if you've played Ret for a long time, you're like, I'm supposed to build to 5, then spend, 5, then spend. In this case, it's not going to be the case. You're going to want to spend earlier specifically because of this tier set. And so that's something you want to keep in mind while you're playing with it. But other than that, there's not much to know. Other than that, it's just luck. You can't really, you can't really min-max like, oh, I'm at, you know, I got lucky. I got super RNG this particular pull, and my winning streak's at max stacks, and so now I'm going to pop my trinket, and everything's going to line up perfectly. That's just not going to happen very often. So you just kind of just want to go with the flow and just play it how it is, and just deal with whatever, whether you have a high winning streak buff, or if you lose it and you get the 4 seconds of being able to spam a button, that's just what you're going to want to do there. So again, it doesn't change a ton of stuff. Just be mindful that you are going to spend your holy power a little bit earlier than normal. Also worth noting, if you played in Season 1, so that means you already have tier set in Season 1, keep this tier set on until you get 4-piece of the new tier set. So that basically means that the 2-set bonus is not that good compared to the 4-set bonus of the old one. So for the new tier set, for this patch, get 4-set and then just replace your old 4-set with that 4-set. So replace old 4-set with new 4-set. If you don't want to do that, fine, then don't do it, right? You can simulate your character, see if that's correct for you. That's just a general rule when you're putting on your tier set, because the 2-set bonus is not super powerful. You want to keep your old tier set on until you can replace all of it with the new tier set. That's very min-maxy, that's very sweaty. You don't have to do that. If you get a new piece of gear and you want to put it on, then go ahead and do it. But if you are min-maxing, you'll want to wait until you can have the new 4-piece before you take off any of your old tier set and lose that stuff. So that's where we are with that. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about trinkets. So trinkets, of course, are a odd thing that can always change because they get tuned a lot. They just happen to. This particular patch, our trinkets didn't get tuned very much, and they just kind of stayed the same, and that was pretty much all good. But I am very questionable about some of these trinkets in this tier, specifically because of the fact that a lot of them aren't simming that well. They aren't performing that well, and you get a lot of like delve trinkets that are performing well. And so whenever that happens, usually what's going to happen is the raid trinkets might get buffed, the mythic plus trinkets might get buffed. But what we can do is we can give you good trinkets to use for single target and good trinkets to use for mythic plus as of right now. And if we have to amend it, we'll amend it. But we can talk about what's good right now and things you should probably be keeping your eye on. The first thing, let's go ahead and talk about just probably the most important trinket as of right now, because it's going to be good for all the content that you do. So let's go to dungeons. And let's go to Floodgate. So Floodgate has this trinket called the Improvised Sephorium Pacemaker. Okay, this is going to be probably like your best Mythic Plus trinket. It's very, very good at Mythic Plus, but it's also pretty decent in single target as well. And so this is just one of those trinkets that, especially early on, you're probably going to want to have, because in some form of content that you're doing, this trinket is going to be very good for you. So this Sephorium Pacemaker, there's going to be one that you want to keep your eye on. It drops from Operation Floodgate. Do this on Mythic Plus. When Mythic Plus opens up, try to farm this trinket. Obviously, you want to get a Myth Track one eventually if you do the highest levels of content, so you have to get it out of your vault if that's the case. But this is a very good trinket in all forms of content, and it's very good in Mythic Plus, but it's also pretty good in single target. So that's a very important trinket to keep your eye out for. Again, that's Operation Floodgate. That's one of the new dungeons. Now let's go to the other trinket that's kind of good in both of the content. So let's go here to, let me find him right here. So it's the same one that drops our weapon, best in slots. What's his name? The One-Arm Bandit. So it's like a slot machine. He drops a trinket called House of Cards. This trinket is not like the best trinket. You're probably not going to see it on many tier lists or whatever. But what it is, it's like the 3rd or 4th best trinket for single target. And it's like the 3rd or 4th best trinket for AoE. So it's kind of similar to the Pacemaker, especially early on. If you get your hands on a House of Cards that's high eye level, this is going to be a good trinket for you to use. And it's definitely something you want to kind of keep your eye on. Is this going to be the best trinket by the end of the patch? Is it going to be considered the best trinket? I don't think so, but it is a very solid trinket, and it's one from the raid. If you can get your hands on it, I highly advise it, just because, again, it's going to be kind of good in all the content that you do. And those are the ones that I love to get early on. I loved, so I never actually got an Arakara Sack Brood, this entire tier, from my vault or anything. I didn't even get one to drop from the dungeon, frankly. But having Mark of Kardros and Skarmak Shard for the entire tier, that was just so good. So even though there are some fights where I kind of wish I had Arakara Sack Brood for this tier, it was nice to just have these trinkets that were just good in all content. And House of Cards is kind of like that. So if you can get House of Cards, that would be another one to keep your eye on. Now, for specifically single target and raid, it's fitting that a raid trinket's very good for single target. Eye of Kazan drops off of Gallywix. So this is a very, very good single target trinket. If you can get your hands on one of these, this is one that you're going to use in raid probably for pretty much everything. So obviously, if in a perfect world, you'd want to simulate it, make sure. But Eye of Kazan is very, very good trinket. Now, for AoE, there's actually a decent trinket. It's, again, I do not think this will be like one that is considered the best by the end of the season necessarily, but early on, a trinket that you're going to want to look for, let's find the mother load here, is this Razdunk's Big Red Button. This simulates really well, especially for AoE, and it's just one of those straight damage trinkets. It just must be tuned decently high enough to where it does good damage. And so, especially early on, if you get your hands on one of these, this will be good for your overall damage on Mythic Plus. And that's this Razdunk's Big Red Button. It drops from the mother load. Again, a lot of the other trinkets that simulate well right now are actually like delve trinkets, and I'm very skeptical that they're going to keep those being very, very strong and have the Mythic Plus and the raid trinkets not be very, very strong. So I anticipate having to do an update video for the trinkets, but these are some ones that you can kind of look for right away. So let's go over them real quick, just their names. So Pacemaker, that's the one from Floodgate. That's really good for Mythic Plus. Pretty good for raid. House of Cards, kind of pretty good for all content. And then Eye of Kazan for raid or single target. And this Razdunk's button is actually pretty good for AoE for Mythic Plus, especially early on, until everything kind of gets sorted out a little bit better. So that's where we are on trinkets. Next, let's talk about the Dinars. So they're not called Dinars, they're called like puzzling cartel chips. But at some point, they said that we're going to have tokens that allow us to get items from the raid. So these are going to be raid items. So what's the obvious choices here? Obviously, you're going to want to choose very rare loot, right, with your cartel chips. So a Jaster Diamond. This is a ring that drops off of Gallywix. It's very rare and it's very, very powerful. This is something you're going to want to target with your cartel chips. It's very hard. It's off the last boss. It's very rare. It's very unlikely you get it. So if you can get that with your cartel chip, that would be very smart to do. Now, are they going to make it so you can't have very rare loot with it? I have no idea. But that would be one of the most important things. The most important thing to me for you to get with your cartel chip is going to be this best in slots. This is the mace off the same boss, the One-Armed Bandit that drops the House of Cards we talked about earlier. Best in slots. It's a on-use, super powerful, two-handed mace. And it's very, very good. It's very, very powerful. If you can get your hand on one naturally, it drops off of a fairly easy boss. Not a fairly easy boss, but a non-end boss in like a Kaiveza range, right, of the bosses. And so it's especially heroic level, it's going to be fairly easy to get one of these. If you do heroic rating or mythic rating, it's going to be fairly easy to get one. But if you don't have one, you might as well grab one of these with your cartel chip. In my opinion, this is very, very strong. There's other very rare loot in here. There's a cloak, for example. It just increases your movement speed. If you already have everything else, you know, just send it on a different very rare item. I don't think there even is any more very rare items. So those would kind of like be your options. You just want to send it on stuff that's hard to get, right? If you couldn't buy the very rare items with the cartel chips, then it really doesn't even matter, honestly. So best in slots and Jaster Diamond, those are kind of the things that you're looking for. Obviously, let's say you do get them though, and you want to get this Eye of Kazan. It's also very strong for raid, so you could do that and get that Eye of Kazan for raid as well with your cartel chip. In this same vein of talking about like really rare loot or very strong gear that we want to get, let's talk really quick about this Siren's Circlet from the Isle. So if you played in Season 1, you probably have this. If you didn't, you might not. If you don't have it, I'm going to say I don't recommend you going back and getting it because I think it's going to get nerfed. As of right now, you would wear this for all of this patch. I do not think they're going to let that happen. They didn't let it happen with the rings and Dragonflight. I think this is going to get massively nerfed as soon as they see everybody is still wearing it. I think it gets massively nerfed. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, maybe I'll issue a correction to that. But as of now, you would just wear this ring. So you would wear this ring and try to get a Jaster Diamond, very rare ring, and wear those two rings. I do think this is going to get nerfed extremely heavily, and that you'll just be wearing a regular ring in this slot fairly early into the patch after this gets nerfed, would be my guess. So I did want to touch on that, though. Is it worth going back? If you really want to, if you don't have anything else to do this first week before the season actually starts, you want to go back and get your ring, you just go to the Siren Isle, farm the ring. There's all kinds of guides on how to get your circlet. You know, I did a guide going over, you know, the best gems for it and stuff like that. And so you can go do that if you like, but I do anticipate this gets nerfed. I see no way they don't. Of course, I could be wrong, but I'm not usually wrong about stuff like this. Next up, let's go to our crafted gear and embellishments. So there's going to be two pieces of crafted gear you're going to wear so they can be embellished. Obviously, you can wear more crafted gear if you like. For me personally, I do bracers and belt. That's just because I'm a blacksmith and I can make my own belt. I can make my own bracers. However, if you want to be truly optimal and you're not worried about that cloak from the raid that increases your movement speed, you could do bracers and cloak. And what you're going to want to embellish on your gear is the Dawnlight thread. That just increases your critical strike rating. The focusing lens is another option. We're not going to be using the Nerubian thing like in Season 1. Some people did in Season 1. I did not. I suggested using Dawn Thread even in Season 1, and I stand by that. But in Season 2, we want to get that best in slots thing if we can, right? From the raid. If there's any way to get that, you want to get that. It's very, very strong. It's a cantrip weapon, and it's just very, very powerful. So if you can get that weapon, you want to get that weapon. And therefore, you would not want to be using a crafted weapon. So you're going to want to put Dawnlight Thread on bracers and cloak, or Dawnlight Thread on like bracers and belt, for example. That's what I'll be doing. And that's what you're going to want to focus with crafted gear and embellishment. Bracers, cloak, or bracers, belt. If you're a blacksmith like me and you just want to wear what you can make or whatever, you can do that. And just put the Dawnlight Thread on them. That increases your critical strike rating. And it's very simple. It's very little damage. It's very, very minor. And then lastly, let's talk about our consumables, our enchants, and our gems. So for food, let's talk about food first. So secondary stat food is actually slightly better than main stat food for us. So that's like the Belladar's Bounty. I believe there's something called some sushi. I don't know if it's new, but there's like some sushi that you can get as well. It's basically the same thing in this patch. And so secondary food is actually better for Ret than main stat food. However, what I'll say is this: if your guild drops main stat food or your group drops main stat food and it's the one that persists through death and you just want to eat it, it's fine. It's very minimal gain, but it is a gain to use the secondary stat food as your food. Next up, weight stones for your weapon. So this is actually something that kind of changes. Again, it's very close, but I have so you could use Iron Claw whetstones or Iron Claw weight stones on your gear. That gives you attack power. It's very, very close, but technically Algari Mana Oil, okay, that's going to slightly outperform him for most people on their weapon. So that's going to increase like your haste and crit, I believe, for that. Again, so it's basically like having a little bit of strength on your weapon or having some haste and crit on your weapon. And the Algari Mana Oil may outperform for you. I mean, I have 50 of these rank 3s left. I'm probably going to keep using them. Personally, it's very on the margins game, but it's worth pointing out that the Algari Mana Oil is very possibly better for you if you actually were to simulate that out. For flasks, in the last tier I said Alchemical Chaos or Mastery. I'm going to stick with just Alchemical Chaos for this tier. You know, Mastery, after the nerf of Mastery, you know, way long ago at this point, it just has not been performing as well as maybe I would have hoped it would. And so for our flask, you'll want to kind of stick with the Alchemical Chaos flask for most content. It's very simple, and it's going to be also, you know, the one that kind of simulates the best as well. For our potions, you just use the tempered potions. You know, very straightforward there with the potions. For enchants, on our rings, we're going to put Mastery on our rings, the Radiant Mastery or whatever. For cloak and bracers, you put your avoidance on your cloak, so like Winged Grace or just the avoidance on the bracers. That's obviously for defense. Chest, you want to put your strength, the Crystalline Radiance, the strength on your chest. You can do speed or stam to your boots. Right now I have Scout's March on. There's another March. Doesn't really matter. That's kind of up to you. I have Scout's March on mine right now. For the weapon, you want Authority of the Depths. I have Stonebound Artistry on. Again, I was kind of favoring Mastery a little bit more in Season 1, and it's very minimal difference. You could, if you did Stonebound Artistry, you could still parse very well. But the Authority of the Depths is probably going to perform a little bit better on average. And so Authority of the Depths is what I'm going to suggest using for Season 2. Put the Stonebound Armor Kit on your legs. That's the main stat plus stamina. Pretty straightforward there. For your gems, for your special diamond gem or whatever, you want to do the primary stat plus the crit effect. That's what a lot of the DPS use. And then for your regular gems, you're typically going to use the quick onyx, which is mastery plus haste. But if you have a ton of haste, it might be better to use the mastery plus crit, whatever onyx that is. But you're going to want to have main stat mastery plus something. So mastery plus haste or mastery plus crit is primarily what you're going to want to use there for your gems. So I think that's everything there. I think we covered everything. Ret is, you know, in a pretty good spot. I did a should you play Retribution Paladin video. It's doing pretty well right now. I think you'll be just kind of outside the meta. The DPS is good. The DPS is in raid. It's not the highest DPS, but it's the kind of damage that you want. It's on demand damage. And Mythic Plus, we're actually probably in even a little bit better state than we are in raid. And then for delves, we're very, very powerful in delves because we have things like bubble and stuff like that, right? And so, and bop, and we kind of cycle between those and not get one shot by auto attacks. And so, yeah, Ret's in a very fun place. It's in a very decent place. Is it the best damage? No, but it is pretty good. So good luck to everybody. If you have any questions about something I didn't cover, I will try to get to that. Like I said, I will be putting out a specific Mythic Plus video. I'll be putting out a specific delve video in the near future to kind of touch on those subjects a little bit more. But hopefully everyone can use this guide. Hopefully it helps people out. This is one of the biggest videos that I do every 6 months or whatever. And, you know, hopefully it seems to be helping a lot of people, and that's what I make these for. So that's it for this one, guys. As always, if you subscribe to the channel, that helps me out a lot. That helps me out the most. If you're already a subscriber, there's a Patreon. You can check that out if you like, just to kind of help me out. It's up to you. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.